Danielle "Dani" Walker stood frozen outside the heavy iron gates of the Caldwell estate, her worn leather bag clenched tightly in her hand. At 29 years old, she had seen her fair share of hardship, but today's desperation carved an unfamiliar hollowness in her chest. The bitter November wind whipped around her, catching the edges of her coat as she stared at the sprawling Lincoln Park mansion. A stately colonial manor with gray stone walls, pristine hedges, and an arched glass canopy over the entrance. The house exuded the kind of wealth Dani had only ever passed by on her way to the bus stop. She exhaled, her breath clouding, and adjusted the crisp but second-hand blazer she'd ironed 3 times this morning to hide the threadbare lining. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in a stranger's driveway, answering a vague ad for a temporary live-in nanny. Not in this part of town, where Teslas outnumbered taxis and even the sidewalks seemed manicured. But 3 months of unemployment, a refrigerator full of expired food, and an eviction notice taped to her apartment door had left her with few choices. Pride didn't pay rent. And the $500 per day offer posted by a nanny agency that barely had a website? It felt sketchy. Unbelievable even. But she'd taken the interview anyway. She pressed the brass intercom button beside the gate and took a shaky breath. "Name?" a voice crackled. "Danielle Walker. I have a 10 o'clock appointment." A moment passed. Then a quiet buzz echoed, and the gate swung inward gracefully. Dani clutched her bag tightly and stepped forward. The front door opened before she could knock. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Ethan Caldwell, 35, was white, tall, well over 6 feet, with tousled light brown hair and piercing blue eyes shadowed with exhaustion. His white button-down shirt was slightly wrinkled, the top 2 buttons undone, exposing the hint of a sculpted chest beneath. Despite the fatigue, he radiated something magnetic. Wealth, power, control. At least, he usually did. Right now, he looked like a man on the edge. Ethan muttered that you must be the 6th one this week, stepping aside so she could enter. "Let's hope you last longer than the others. I'm one crying episode away from hiring a priest for an exorcism." Dani lifted her chin, not flinching at the sarcasm or the unspoken judgment behind his tone. "I'm not just a nanny, Mr. Caldwell. I'm a licensed pediatric nurse with 8 years of clinical experience. If your nephew hasn't stopped crying with the previous caregivers, the issue isn't the nannies." That got his attention. Ethan raised an eyebrow, a spark of interest flickering through his weary gaze. "Bold. I like that. But I hope you're ready to eat those words." She followed him inside, her shoes clicking lightly against the gleaming marble floors. The home's interior was elegant yet cold. Massive ceilings, white crown molding, and pristine furniture that looked like it had never been touched. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that screamed of absence. Dani's gaze swept over a framed photo on the wall as they ascended the curved staircase. In her early 30s, a woman with a bright smile held a chubby infant in her arms. The resemblance to Ethan was immediate. "My sister Rachel," Ethan said quietly, noticing her pause. "That was 6 months ago. She died in a car accident 6 weeks back." Dani nodded gently. "I'm sorry. She was coming to visit us. It was supposed to be a typical weekend." Ethan's voice tightened, and he looked away. They reached the nursery, and the moment the door opened, Dani heard it. The wailing, high-pitched, desperate, endless. Just 6 months old, Micah Caldwell lay in a stunning antique crib that probably cost more than Dani's car. The walls were adorned with soft cloud murals, shelves lined with untouched storybooks and plush animals, yet the air was heavy with grief. The room had every luxury, except comfort. "I've tried everything," Ethan muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Doctors say he's fine, but he hasn't stopped crying for more than a few minutes in days, weeks. He just won't settle. Dani didn't hesitate. She stepped toward the crib, gently reached down, and lifted the baby into her arms. The silence was instant. Micah hiccuped once, then snuggled into her chest, small fists clutching her blazer like it was made of gold. Ethan stared at her as if she'd just performed magic. His voice dropped. How the hell did you do that? Dani looked down at the baby boy, now peacefully sucking his thumb. Sometimes babies need to feel safe, loved. She didn't know then that those simple words would change everything. Micah's tiny fingers closed around hers, and something cracked open inside her. An ache she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not since Lily, her daughter, her light, her loss. "What's his story?" she asked, settling into a pale blue rocking chair by the window. Ethan stayed by the doorway, his arms crossed tightly. Rachel adopted him shortly after he was born. His biological parents weren't in the picture. When she died, guardianship fell to me. He looked like he still hadn't processed it. I run a company. I design medical software. I know databases and hospital systems, not this. Not bottles and swaddles and screaming. "You're doing better than you think," Dani said, surprised by her voice's warmth. "No, I'm not." He laughed hollowly. "I have a team of 30 engineers I can lead through product launches and code wars. But one baby, I'm drowning." Dani held Micah closer. Babies know when they're surrounded by chaos. They mirror our emotions. Right now, he needs to be calm. Consistency. Gentle structure. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind those tired blue eyes. "I want to stay overnight," Dani said suddenly, "at least for a few nights, so I can build a proper routine with him." "That's not necessary." "It is if you want him to sleep through the night." Their eyes locked. Tension shimmered between them. Not romantic yet, but charged with something more profound. Trust. Challenge. A test. Ethan finally nodded. "Fine. Mrs. Rivera will show you to the guest room." Ethan hovered near the door as she laid Micah back in his crib. "Ms. Walker," he said. She turned. "Dani," she corrected softly. "Dani," he repeated. "Micah's going to be okay, right?" Her voice was gentle. "Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. He needs someone to stay." He didn't say anything, just nodded once and walked out. Dani sat back in the rocking chair, watching Micah's tiny chest rise and fall as he drifted into sleep. Her own heart was still thundering. She had no idea she had just stepped into a story that would heal them all. The soft creak of the rocking chair was the only sound in the nursery, save for the rhythmic breathing of the baby, fast asleep in the antique crib. Dani sat in the dim light of the moon, filtering through the curtains, her arms wrapped loosely around herself, as if trying to hold something in or back. It had been a long time since she felt peace in her bones. And yet, here, in a stranger's house, with a grieving infant, and a man she barely knew pacing the halls, Dani felt an unexpected stillness settle into her chest, until it didn't. She jolted awake sometime after midnight, heart racing, unsure of what had startled her. It took a second to remember where she was. The guest rocking chair, the nursery, the faint glow of a nightlight casting warm shadows on the walls. Then she heard it. Not crying. Singing. Soft, low, and strained. She stepped out quietly into the hallway and followed the sound. Down the hall, the faint light from the study bled into the corridor. The door was ajar. Ethan sat at the baby grand piano near the window, his fingers trembling slightly over the keys. He wasn't playing, just resting his hands there, like they needed something to hold that wasn't falling apart. His head was bowed, the song he sang barely a whisper, one Dani didn't recognize. She didn't move, didn't want to interrupt. After a moment, his voice cracked and stopped altogether. He sat there in silence, still as stone. "I didn't know anyone used that piano," Dani said softly from the doorway. Ethan startled slightly, but didn't turn. Rachel did. She taught herself during med school, said she needed something that made her feel human again. He finally looked over his shoulder at her, his eyes puffy and tired. "I keep expecting her to walk through the door and tell me I'm doing everything wrong," he said with a weak laugh. Dani stepped inside. "Grief doesn't follow logic. Sometimes it just sits with you, waiting." "She was my big sister," he said quietly. "She was supposed to outlive me. She was the responsible one, the planner. She'd mapped out Micah's college fund before he could sit up." He ran a hand over his jaw, scrubbing the stubble like he could scrub the sadness away. "I should have been in the car that night, not her." The words hit the air like a gut punch, raw and unfiltered. Dani sat on the arm of the nearby chair, not too close. "You're carrying weight that doesn't belong to you." He looked at her sharply, as if no one had dared say that before. "I was a nurse," she continued. "You think I don't know what survivor's guilt looks like? But here's the truth. No one blames you, Ethan, except maybe you." Silence stretched between them, and then, very softly, he asked, "Do you have kids?" The question came out of nowhere, and Dani's chest tightened before she could respond. "I did." Ethan blinked, confused. "She was 2. Lily." Dani forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a rare mitochondrial disorder. "We had more hospital stays than birthdays. She died in my arms during a snowstorm 2 winters ago." Ethan's expression shifted, the sorrow in his gaze deepening. "I'm so sorry." Dani nodded once. "Me too." For a moment, they were simply 2 broken people, sitting in the middle of a beautiful house, held together by grief and the baby sleeping just down the hall. "I should get some sleep," Dani said after a while, standing. Ethan didn't stop her, but as she reached the door, he said, "Thank you for being here, for helping Micah, for staying." She nodded and slipped out. Back in the nursery, Micah stirred as she entered, his little body twisting under the blanket. Dani reached down and gently rested her hand on his back, humming a lullaby she used to sing to Lily. He quieted instantly. The next morning, sunlight poured in through the tall nursery windows, casting golden beams across the floor. Dani blinked awake from the guest bed as she heard a soft cooing. Micah was awake, but not crying. She sat up quickly and crossed to the crib. He lay there, chewing on the corner of a soft giraffe toy, babbling contentedly to himself, like he had always been this peaceful. Dani grinned. "Good morning, sunshine." As she lifted him, a small stream of drool landed squarely on her blouse, the same one she'd worn yesterday. She sighed. "Well, guess we're making fashion statements early." With Micah balanced on her hip, she padded into the hall, stopping briefly in front of the first-floor walk-in closet Ethan had shown her the night before. He'd told her to grab anything she needed. She selected a plain white dress shirt from a row of crisply hung button-downs and slipped it on. It was oversized, the sleeves rolled up twice, and the hem brushed her thighs long enough to pair with the leggings she'd slept in. She made her way downstairs, her bare feet quiet on the hardwood. In the kitchen, she found Ethan already dressed. Gray slacks, navy sweater, a mug of coffee in one hand, and a laptop open on the island. He looked up and stared. His eyes traveled from her tousled curls to her long legs, to how his shirt clung to her frame. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "That's my shirt." Dani raised an eyebrow, a sharp eye. "Mine's marinating in baby drool upstairs." Ethan cleared his throat and tried to look away. "Next time, warn me before you wear something like that." She smirked and set Micah into the high chair. "You get flustered easily for a CEO. I do not. You just did." He narrowed his eyes, but couldn't suppress the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. They moved through the morning quietly. Coffee brewing, baby giggling, the air lighter than it had been in weeks. Dani prepared a bottle, expertly warming it and handing it off while Ethan watched from across the counter. "He's different," Ethan said after a while, glancing at Micah as he contentedly sipped his formula. "Like he's okay again." "Babies pick up on everything," Dani said gently. "The grief in the house, the chaos. He felt it all. He didn't have words for it." Ethan was quiet. "You brought peace," he said finally. "I didn't do anything miraculous. I just showed up." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You did more than that, Dani." For a second, the air shifted. He held her gaze, and for a moment, it wasn't about bottles or babysitting or grief. It was about something unspoken, something neither of them wanted to admit was growing far too fast. The moment ended when Micah burped impressively loudly, startling them both. Ethan laughed, and Dani followed, grateful for the break in tension. Later that afternoon, while Micah napped upstairs and the house settled into its quiet rhythm, Dani found herself in the kitchen, organizing a list of items the baby needed: diapers, teething rings, and some bath essentials. Ethan leaned against the doorway watching her. "You're staying, right?" he asked suddenly. Dani blinked. "Staying?" "More than just the weekend. Micah's never been this calm. And I can't do this without you." She hesitated. This was supposed to be temporary, a bandage until she figured out her next step. But for the first time in years, her hands didn't shake. Her mind didn't spiral. Her chest didn't ache with the weight of the past. "I'll stay," she said softly, "but only if we make one thing clear." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I'm here for Micah. That's all." Ethan's expression shifted. Hurt, confusion, maybe even disappointment. But he nodded. Understood. But as Dani turned back to the grocery list, her heart whispered a truth she couldn't face just yet. She wasn't just staying for the baby. She was staying because somewhere between the grief and the silence, the cold halls and quiet piano keys, something had started to thaw. By Tuesday morning, the Caldwell mansion had changed in small but significant ways. The baby monitor that once screeched endlessly with Micah's cries now hummed softly with the occasional babble or coo. Once cold and unused, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon toast. Even Mrs. Rivera, the longtime housekeeper who had moved silently through the hallways like a ghost, now hummed softly as she tidied the dining room. The air itself felt warmer, and Ethan noticed. He stood in the nursery doorway, leaning quietly against the frame, watching Dani change Micah's diaper with the ease of someone who knew what she was doing and cared deeply while doing it. Micah kicked his legs happily on the changing table, gurgling up at her while she smiled and wiped him clean with practiced, gentle hands. "You're surprisingly good at that," Ethan said. She glanced over her shoulder and smirked. "Surprisingly? I mean, he hasn't screamed, the table's still standing, and no one's been peed on. That's impressive." Dani laughed. High praise came from the man who once called himself a tech CEO and couldn't figure out how to open a pack of wipes. I maintain that sadists design those packages. She lifted Micah and blew a raspberry on his belly, earning a squeal of delight before carrying him to the rocking chair. Ethan stepped into the room, his gaze lingering on them. You always seem so calm, like you've done this forever. She adjusted Micah against her chest, lowering her voice. When Lily was alive, I learned to operate on 20 minutes of sleep and coffee I couldn't afford. Some habits stick. Ethan sat down on the window seat, elbows resting on his knees. Do you ever think about doing it again? Having another child? She asked, brushing a hand gently over Micah's delicate curls. He nodded. Dani paused. Sometimes. Then I feel guilty. Like, even thinking about another baby erases her. It doesn't. She looked up. He said, I didn't know Lily, but I can see how much you loved her. I see it in how you hold him. You don't need to feel guilty for healing. Dani swallowed hard and looked away, her throat tight. Healing is complicated. So is grief. They sat silently for a moment as Micah drifted into sleep, his little hand curling against Dani's shoulder. Ethan stood, exhaled, and ran a hand through his hair. I need coffee. You want a cup? Please. A few minutes later, Dani padded into the kitchen wearing the same oversized shirt she'd borrowed the day before. She hadn't had time to change and figured Ethan wouldn't mind. Except this time, he wasn't distracted by spreadsheets or crying babies. This time, he was facing the espresso machine, and when he turned, his gaze caught hers immediately. He froze, then let his eyes travel, just for a second, over the curve of her collarbone, the way the shirt hugged her waist, and the bare skin of her legs peeking out beneath the hem. Dani raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. If you spill that coffee, I'm not cleaning it up. Ethan blinked and quickly looked away, clearing his throat. Right. Yes. Coffee. He turned back to the counter as if it were the most interesting thing in the room. Dani smirked and slid onto a stool at the island. You know, for someone who runs a tech empire, you're easy to fluster. I am not flustered. Your ears are red. He muttered something under his breath and handed her the mug, careful not to meet her eyes. They drank silently for a moment, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Ethan broke it. I want to ask you something, and I don't want you to take it wrong. Dani sipped. Okay. Why did you take the job? Her brow furrowed. Because your nephew was crying and you were desperate? Why take a sketchy ad from an unverified agency that didn't even include an address? You're overqualified. Dani studied her mug for a moment. I'd just gotten served my third eviction notice. I had a fridge full of condiments and a single egg. I was 2 weeks behind on insulin payments for my mother's prescription plan. And even if none of that were true, I took the job because something about that ad felt like I needed to. Ethan frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. They finished their coffee without another word. Dani took Micah for a walk around the block in his stroller that afternoon. The fresh air brought color back to her cheeks, and the steady rhythm of movement soothed them both. The neighborhood was quiet, the houses tall and elegant, the sidewalks lined with red and gold leaves that crunched underfoot. When she returned to the house, Ethan was on a business call in the study, his voice low and authoritative. Dani passed quietly, catching only a few words. Implementation deadline, hospital pilot, data encryption compliance. It was easy to forget he was the head of a tech company that serviced hundreds of hospitals nationwide. At home, Ethan was all unshaven cheeks and wrinkled collars, full of half-empty coffee cups and tired blue eyes. She slipped upstairs and changed into jeans and a sweater, needing the boundary that clothing sometimes gave her. As she folded Ethan's shirt neatly and set it aside, She couldn't deny the way the fabric still held the warmth of the morning, the ghost of something intimate that hadn't quite happened, and maybe never would. Dinner was quiet. Mrs. Rivera had cooked a simple roast, and they ate at the kitchen island instead of the dining room, Micah bouncing in his baby seat between them. "You know," Ethan said. "He laughed today." "I know." "I was there," Dani replied. "No, I mean, like really laughed. That belly laugh babies do. First time." She smiled. "He's learning it's okay to be happy again." Ethan looked at her. "So am I." The words landed between them, gentle, but weighted. Dani didn't respond. Not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how. She stood to rinse the plates. Ethan joined her, brushing against her shoulder as he reached for a dish. The contact was brief, but it lingered in her skin. They didn't speak of it. But the wall between them? It had a crack now. Dani sat in her room that night, writing in a worn, leather-bound journal. She recorded Micah's progress, the way he rolled over twice that morning, the new sound he made when he saw the blue bear blanket, the way he reached for her when she walked in the room. She also wrote about Ethan. He looked at her sometimes, like she was a puzzle he didn't want to solve or admire. She tapped her pen against the edge of the journal. This job was supposed to be a bridge, a way out of desperation. A few weeks of structure until she found stable footing again. So why was her heart starting to want more? More baby giggles, more quiet coffee mornings, more stolen glances across countertops. She closed the journal, placed it gently on the nightstand, and turned off the lamp. As she lay in the dark, Dani knew she was breaking her rule. She wasn't just here for Micah anymore, and that scared her more than anything. The sun had barely peeked over the rooftops when Dani opened her eyes. She hadn't set an alarm, but her body was already synced to the rhythm of Micah's needs. Quietly slipping out of bed, she pulled her robe tighter around her waist and padded down the hall. Micah began to stir in his crib, a soft whimper escaping his lips. When Dani scooped him into her arms, he was already smiling, eyes bright, chubby arms reaching instinctively for her. She chuckled and kissed the top of his head. "Good morning, love bug." The nursery had changed, not in design, but in energy. There were new items on the changing table, things Dani had requested: gentle wipes, fragrance-free lotion, teething rings, and a soft nightlight shaped like a moon that bathed the room in a peaceful glow at night. Micah's clothes were now folded neatly in the dresser drawers, not just tossed into bins. She'd even added a baby milestone board above his crib, carefully documenting his daily sleep hours and developmental progress. And the most critical change was that Micah no longer screamed when he woke up. He no longer cried inconsolably throughout the day. He smiled. He reached for toys. He babbled. He giggled when Dani made faces at him during bottle time. Micah was healing. And so was the house. Downstairs, the kitchen was already humming with lowlife. The scent of freshly brewed coffee met her before she reached the bottom step. "Good morning," Ethan greeted her from behind his laptop at the island. His voice was rough but warm. "He let you sleep till 6. We might be getting soft." "I'll believe it when it happens 2 days in a row," she replied, setting Micah gently in his high chair. Ethan stood and retrieved a banana from the counter, expertly slicing it and placing a few soft pieces onto Micah's tray. "He tried to say something earlier," Ethan said. "Sounded like da. Could have been blah, but I'm going with da." Dani smiled. It all counts. They shared a look, equal parts awe and fatigue, and then turned back to the baby, who clumsily smashed a banana slice in his fist and beamed like he'd solved world peace. As the day went on, the quiet laughter that had become a daily staple returned. Dani and Mrs. Rivera shared stories in the kitchen while preparing Micah's meals. Ethan, between meetings, would pause to crouch beside the playmat in the living room, and make ridiculous animal sounds to hear Micah shriek with laughter. And the more they laughed, the more the house's silence, the grief seeped into the walls like mold, began to retreat. That afternoon, Dani and Ethan took Micah to the small garden in the backyard. The air was cool, but not cold. Crisp leaves blanketing the ground in hues of gold and copper. Dani laid out a thick picnic blanket, while Ethan carried the baby, bundled in a fleece hoodie with bear ears. "He's so different outside," Ethan observed, as Micah reached for a leaf with wide eyes. "He's discovering his world," Dani said, smiling. "He must have more to look at than ceiling fans and mobiles." They sat together on the blanket, Micah between them, babbling and tugging on the corner of Dani's sleeve. The closeness was easy, comfortable, unforced. Ethan leaned back on his hands, stretching out his legs. "You know, I used to hate this yard." Dani looked at him. "Why?" It felt empty. "We moved in right after Rachel's adoption was finalized. She had big plans for it. Swing sets, treehouse, flower beds. After the accident, I couldn't look at it without seeing everything she never got to do." Dani let that settle. And now? He watched Micah giggle at the sight of a squirrel darting along the fence. Now. It feels alive again. They were quiet for a beat, letting the moment breathe. "Thank you," Ethan said suddenly, his voice soft but clear. Dani blinked. "For what?" "For coming here. For not running when things were hard. For bringing him back to life." She met his gaze. "I'm just doing what I know." "No. You're doing more than that. You're giving him something I couldn't." Dani looked down at Micah, now gnawing happily on a teething ring. She didn't say what she was thinking. "He's giving me something too." That evening, Dani gave Micah his bath while Ethan hovered in the doorway, watching and learning. She showed him how to check the water temperature with the inside of his wrist, support Micah's neck while washing his hair, and play without overstimulating him. "He looks so small in there," Ethan murmured, kneeling beside the tub. "He is small," Dani said, smiling, but growing fast. "You'd be amazed at what babies can do when they feel safe." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's why I brought you here. I knew something was wrong." He wasn't just grieving. He was scared. Dani paused. "You were too." His eyes flicked to hers. "It's okay," she added. "You don't have to carry all of it alone." He looked down at Micah, who splashed and cooed without a care. "I've never been good at asking for help." "You didn't ask. But you still found it." She reached over and gently squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. After Micah was asleep and the house had gone quiet again, Ethan wandered into the kitchen to find Dani sipping tea, her journal in front of her. She didn't notice him at first. Her expression focused, thoughtful. "What are you writing?" he asked softly. She looked up, startled. Micah's progress. His sleep patterns, appetite, and new reactions. "I've kept journals like this since I was in nursing school. It helps me see the story. The story. The one the baby can't tell you in words." Ethan stepped closer, glancing at the neatly inked notes and small sketches of Micah's favorite toys. "You're incredible, you know that?" he said, almost under his breath. Dani's cheeks flushed. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say things like that when you're tired and vulnerable and kind." He leaned against the counter. "Why not?" "Because I might start to believe you mean it." His gaze held hers. "I do." She stood, suddenly needing space, and rinsed her mug. "I should turn in," she said, keeping her voice even. "Tomorrow's another early start." He nodded, though his eyes didn't leave her. She made it halfway to the staircase before he called her name. "Dani?" She paused. He hesitated. "You don't have to do this alone either." She didn't respond, But she didn't walk away either. After a moment, she turned and gave him a tired but genuine smile. "I know." Then she disappeared up the stairs. Ethan stood in the kitchen long after she'd gone, hands curled around the edge of the island, staring at the spot where she'd just been. The house was healing, but so was he. The doorbell's sharp chime echoed through the mansion late Saturday afternoon, interrupting a moment of rare peace. Dani had just finished feeding Micah, who now sat on her hip while she bounced gently and hummed a lullaby. The baby was calm, drifting somewhere between contentment and sleep. Ethan was upstairs, likely reviewing contracts for the new pediatric software rollout he had mentioned earlier that morning. She wasn't expecting anyone. Neither, she was sure, was Ethan. Dani shifted Micah to her other side and walked toward the front foyer. As she reached the door, Mrs. Rivera crossed the marble floor, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "I've got it," Dani offered with a small smile. Mrs. Rivera hesitated, then stepped aside. Dani opened the door and froze. A woman stood on the threshold in a crisp cream coat draped over her shoulders like a cape. Her platinum blonde hair was swept into a sleek, low bun, not a strand out of place. Her heels clicked lightly as she shifted her weight, and her smile was that of someone who already owned the room before entering. "Hello," the woman said smoothly. "You must be the nanny." Dani adjusted her grip on Micah and nodded slowly. "Yes. Can I help you?" Before she could answer, Ethan's voice cut through the hallway. "Genevieve." Dani turned slightly as Ethan descended the stairs. He looked momentarily startled, his lips tightening as he reached the bottom step. "I didn't know you were coming," he said, tone clipped. Genevieve Langford's expression didn't waver. "You never return my calls. I decided to make sure you were still alive." Dani shifted uncomfortably. Micah stirred slightly, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Ethan stepped forward, body language tense but polite. "This isn't a good time." Genevieve's eyes flitted to Dani again, then down to the baby in her arms. "So I see." Dani felt it. A subtle appraisal, a quiet dismissal. "And who is this lovely woman?" Genevieve asked with mock sweetness. "Danielle Walker," Dani said, keeping her voice calm. "I care for Micah." Genevieve extended a manicured hand without sincerity. Charmed. "I'm Genevieve Langford, Ethan's fiancée." Dani's breath caught, but her expression didn't change. Ethan, however, reacted instantly. "Ex-fiancée," he said firmly. 8 months now. We've been over this." Genevieve's smile didn't falter. "Temporary setbacks don't change everything, darling." Dani's stomach twisted, not from jealousy, but from the quiet certainty that this woman, perfectly composed, visibly powerful, was here for more than a casual visit. Dani said, stepping back, "I'll put Micah down for his nap." "No need," Ethan said quickly, his gaze flicking to hers with apology. "Stay. Whatever Genevieve wants to say, she can say in front of you." Genevieve arched one perfect brow. "How democratic of you. However, specific conversations are best left between equals." The insinuation hit like a slap, but Dani held her ground. She wasn't going to give this woman the satisfaction of a reaction. "I'll be in the nursery if you need me," she said to Ethan, then walked away, her back straight and head high. Dani rocked Micah gently in the nursery, but her mind was miles away. She knew it wasn't her place to feel anything about Ethan's past. She was the nanny, a temporary employee, someone who was here to help a baby, not fall into complicated territory with a man still entangled in old, messy threads. But her heart had other ideas. She peered through the upstairs hallway window, catching a glimpse of the red Maserati parked in the circular drive. It gleamed like it belonged in a fashion magazine. Of course, Ethan had been engaged to someone like Genevieve. Of course, his world was filled with people who belonged in fundraisers and boardrooms, not single mothers with scarred hearts and thrifted shoes. Micah stirred against her shoulder, and she gently rubbed his back. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was reassuring, him or herself. Downstairs, Genevieve's voice floated from the living room, each word laced with practiced charm. "You've lost weight. The stress must be getting to you." Ethan sipped his coffee and said nothing. "Ethan, is this the whole situation? You weren't built for it. A baby? Guardianship? You're a CEO, not a single father." "I'm managing." "You're drowning," she replied lightly. "And now what? You have a nursemaid playing house in your kitchen? Dani isn't—" He paused. "She's doing more for Micah than anyone else ever could, including me." Genevieve's smile faded. "I don't know what you're doing with her, but it won't last. You know that, right? Your world, our world, it doesn't include women like her." "You're right," Ethan said, his voice cool. "It didn't, and maybe that's the problem." Genevieve blinked, caught off guard for the first time. "Thank you for stopping by," Ethan continued. "But I think we're done here." She stood, lips tight. "You'll see. I'm right when the novelty wears off." Ethan exhaled and rubbed his eyes as the door clicked behind her. Upstairs, Dani watched from the window as Genevieve stalked toward her car. The blonde didn't glance back once, but Dani knew this wasn't the end of her. That evening, Ethan found Dani in the kitchen preparing Micah's formula. The silence between them was thick. "I'm sorry," he said finally, leaning on the counter. "She wasn't supposed to show up." Dani nodded, eyes fixed on the bottle. "You don't owe me an explanation." He sighed. "I wasn't going to lie. I was engaged. It ended badly. I haven't spoken to her since spring. She still seems very invested. She's used to controlling the narrative." Dani turned and met his gaze. "So, what's the story now, Ethan?" He hesitated. "The truth? I don't know. I thought I had everything figured out. My company, my future. Then Rachel died, and Micah became my world overnight. You walked in, and suddenly everything I thought I wanted felt small." Dani swallowed, her heart pounding. "I'm not expecting anything," Ethan said. "I want you to know what you're doing here matters. To him, to me." Before Dani could respond, Micah let out a whimper from the monitor. She moved quickly, grateful for the excuse to leave the room. But as she climbed the stairs, her thoughts spun. She wasn't sure what scared her more, Genevieve's elegance and power. Ethan's words made something fragile inside her, and she wanted to hope again. Wednesday evening fell quiet and cold, the fall night hinting at the coming winter. A low wind whispered through the trees in the garden, and the warmth inside the Caldwell house was a sharp contrast to the chill, creeping beyond its walls. Dani stood at the stove in the kitchen, stirring a pot of homemade chicken soup. The savory scent mingled with the gentle crackle of the fireplace in the adjacent den. She'd bundled Micah into a fuzzy blue onesie with bear ears earlier. Now, he was playing on the floor beneath a baby gym, swatting at a plush elephant with impressive determination. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, watching the scene with a quiet kind of reverence. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" he asked, nodding toward the simmering pot. Dani glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "My grandmother. She used to say the way to calm a storm was with garlic, thyme, and patience." Ethan chuckled, stepping farther into the room. "Is that in a cookbook somewhere, or just wise family folklore?" "Probably both." He moved to the counter and began slicing bread, surprisingly adept with the knife. "I miss this," he said quietly. Dani looked up. "Miss what?" Having a house that smells like home. That feels like someone lives here. He glanced toward the den, where Micah gurgled happily. It hasn't felt like that since Rachel died, but lately, it's coming back. Dani paused, the ladle in her hand hovering above the pot. You're doing a good job, Ethan, even when you don't feel like you are. I don't feel like I am. Most of the time, I'm winging it. That's called parenting. Their eyes met. The warmth between them was subtle, but undeniable, like the first moments before a fire takes hold. After dinner, they took Micah upstairs for his bath. Ethan insisted on helping again, fumbling through shampooing Micah's hair while Dani handed him towels and offered gentle guidance. You act like you're dismantling a bomb, she teased as he carefully rinsed soap from the baby's head. Ethan muttered because he squirmed like one, earning a burst of laughter from Dani and a squeal of delight from Micah. They settled into the nursery when the bath was done, and Micah was dry, warm, and drowsy. Dani read from a picture book while Ethan rocked beside her, both of them letting the soft cadence of her voice lull the baby to sleep. Micah's eyelids fluttered shut. His tiny fingers curled around the edge of a blanket. Ethan exhaled quietly and leaned back. He whispered, I don't remember the last time the house was this peaceful. Dani closed the book and looked down at the sleeping baby. He's starting to trust the world again. They stood slowly, careful not to wake him, and entered the hallway. Dani pulled the nursery door nearly shut behind them. They stood side by side in the dim hallway, surrounded by silence. You're something else, Ethan said. Dani glanced up at him. Is that a good thing? He turned toward her. It's the best thing. Something in his voice made her breath catch. Something honest and raw and entirely unguarded. She hadn't seen him this open before. Vulnerable, yes. Grieving, certainly. But not stripped down like this. He stepped closer. Dani's heartbeat quickened. Ethan. I know, he said softly, reading the warning in her tone. I know this isn't very easy, but He stopped, searching her eyes. I want to thank you for all of it. Their eyes locked, and then the space between them disappeared. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't reckless. It was slow, like both were leaning into something they couldn't avoid anymore. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing lightly along Dani's cheek, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Her breath hitched. I shouldn't, he whispered. I know, she whispered back. But neither of them moved. Ethan dipped his head slightly, his mouth so close that his breath warmed her. Dani tilted her chin up just enough for their lips to nearly meet, a heartbeat away. Then, Micah cried, sharp, sudden, needy. The sound shattered the moment like glass. They both blinked, snapping back to reality. Ethan stepped away instantly, shaking his hand through his hair. Dani turned toward the nursery, her chest tight. I'll get him, she said quickly, reaching for the door handle. No. Let me, Ethan said, his voice husky. She nodded and stepped back, watching him disappear into the room. Alone in the hallway, Dani pressed her hand to her chest to quiet the thunder behind her ribs. Her lips still tingled with the ghost of something that hadn't quite happened. Something she'd almost let happen. She turned and walked briskly to her room, not trusting herself to look back. Ethan stood beside the crib, gently rubbing Micah's back. I know, buddy, he murmured. Bad timing, huh? Micah settled quickly, his little whimpers fading. But Ethan didn't leave right away. He stood there, staring down at the baby, trying to calm the storm inside himself. Dani was off limits. She was here to care for Micah. She was professional, capable, and entirely too important to lose. And yet, one look, one smile, one moment in the hallway, he'd nearly crossed a line he'd promised not to touch. It wasn't just an attraction anymore. It was something more profound, something terrifying. He couldn't afford to fall for her, but it might already be too late. That night, Dani lay in bed staring at the ceiling, sleep far out of reach. She repeatedly replayed the hallway moment, the way Ethan had looked at her, and her body had leaned into his without hesitation. The truth gnawed at her. She hadn't felt that way in years. Not since before the hospital nights with Lily. Not since the funeral, and the weight of her world collapsing. She'd told herself she was here for the job, for the baby. But Ethan had stopped being just Micah's uncle somewhere along the way. He'd become something else, something dangerous, something she couldn't afford to want. Because if she let herself fall and he missed her, she wouldn't survive that kind of break again. Dani turned onto her side, clutching her pillow, and whispered into the quiet room, "Don't be stupid." But it was already too late. Her heart was listening to something else entirely. By Friday afternoon, the wind outside the Caldwell mansion had picked up, rattling the windows and sending leaves skittering down the long driveway like dancers caught in a storm's rehearsal. The weather forecast called for heavy rain, possibly even a thunderstorm, but the mood was deceptively calm inside the house. Micah was unusually fussy, sensing the shift in pressure. He clung to Dani all day, refusing to nap for more than 20 minutes, and whimpering every time she left the room. "I think he knows something's coming," Dani said, bouncing him lightly in the crook of her arm. Ethan replied, "Storms do any time now," glancing out the kitchen window as the sky darkened. The electricity flickered once, then steadied. Dani raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "I've got a backup generator," he assured her. "But just in case, I charged all the emergency lights and stocked the basement with enough batteries to survive the apocalypse." Dani smiled, prepared for everything. Except you," he muttered under his breath, then quickly turned away to grab a flashlight from the drawer. She pretended not to hear it. Micah whimpered again and buried his face in her shoulder. Dani rubbed his back, murmuring, "It's just noise, baby. Nothing can hurt you here." But her voice trembled slightly, because noise or not, things were shifting, and not just in the sky. By nightfall, the rain had arrived in sheets, pounding against the windows and turning the garden into a pool of shadows. Thunder cracked across the sky like splitting stone. The lights flickered again, and then died completely. The house went dark. Micah wailed instantly. "I've got him," Dani said, scooping him into her arms and rocking him gently. "I'll check the generator," Ethan called from down the hall. "It should have kicked in by now." Candles flickered in glass holders on the mantel and dining table. Rivera lit several candles in the kitchen before retiring to her suite for the evening, promising to check in if needed. Dani paced the living room with Micah in her arms, humming softly over the sound of the storm. The flickering candlelight danced across her face, casting shadows that softened her features and made her look almost ethereal. Ethan returned moments later, damp and breathless. "The transformer's down. The generator's fine, but it's not getting power. The power company said it may be hours." Dani nodded. "We'll manage." She settled into the armchair, Micah resting against her chest, finally calming in her embrace. Ethan took the seat across from her, watching quietly. The room was silent, save for the rain and the rhythmic tapping of tree branches against the windows. "Tell me something real," Dani said suddenly, breaking the stillness. "Something no one else knows." Ethan arched a brow. "That's a dangerous request. I can handle it." He hesitated, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I built my company to help hospitals work better. Integrated systems, streamlined patient data, fewer mistakes. But when Rachel died, I realized I could design perfect tech while powerless when it mattered most." Dani watched him closely. I couldn't protect her, and for a while, I hated everything I'd built. It felt useless. "You're not useless," she said gently. Ethan gave a sad smile. "And you? Something real?" Dani stared into the candlelight. "I still sleep with one of Lily's blankets. Not every night, but when it's quiet, I might forget the sound of her laugh. I take it out and hold it close." He didn't respond with words, just leaned back, visibly moved. Micah stirred again, and Dani kissed the top of his head. Then, he looked up to find Ethan watching her with a softness that tightened her chest. "You're remarkable," he said. "I'm surviving." "Same thing." Their eyes held for a beat too long, the air thick with emotion. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "Keep caring after so much loss." Dani considered the question because not caring hurts worse. Because the alternative is going numb. And Lily deserves more than that. So does Micah. Ethan stood slowly, walking over to her. "So do you." Dani looked up, her heart thudding as he knelt beside the chair. "You bring life into this house," he whispered. "You don't just care for him. You've rebuilt us from the inside out." "I didn't mean to." "I know." A clap of thunder cracked directly above them, making the windows shudder. Micah let out a startled cry. Dani rose immediately, rocking him, murmuring reassurance. Ethan reached for a blanket and helped wrap it around them both. "I've got you," he said, but it wasn't clear if he meant Micah or Dani. She looked at him, wet lashes framing eyes full of unspoken things. "I should take him upstairs," she said. "I'll come with you." They moved together toward the nursery, the dim candlelight guiding their steps. The thunder grew distant upstairs, rolling softly like a lullaby played too slow. Ethan watched as Dani settled Micah into his crib, humming as she smoothed his blanket. The baby's eyelids fluttered closed, exhaustion overtaking fear. When she turned, Ethan was still standing there. Neither moved. Neither spoke. There, in the doorway of the nursery, something shifted again. A breath, a glance, a heartbeat between choices. Ethan stepped forward. Dani didn't stop him. His hand lifted, fingers brushing her cheek. Her eyes fluttered closed. She leaned into the touch like it was something she hadn't let herself crave. Something dangerous, but needed. And then he kissed her. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't safe. It was slow and full of every unspoken truth they'd kept buried since they met. Dani's hand found his chest, fingers curling into his sweater. Ethan pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, every inch of space between them, vanishing in the fire they'd tried so long to ignore. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together, breathing fast and shallow. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "I shouldn't have let you," she replied. But neither moved away. "I don't regret it," Ethan whispered. "Neither do I," Dani said. "That's what scares me." He looked at her then, really looked. "We can't go back, can we?" "No," she said softly. "But I don't know if we're ready to move forward either." A pause. Then Ethan said, "We'll figure it out, one moment at a time." She nodded, heart pounding. They stood in the candlelight, wrapped in shadows and secrets, listening to Micah's soft breathing and the storm easing beyond the windows. For the first time in a long time, Dani wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she was finally starting to believe it might be worth finding out. Saturday dawned with a deceptive stillness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed pale gray and a garden glittering with raindrops. The house, too, was quiet, almost reverent, like it was holding its breath. Dani moved slowly through the kitchen, her fingers curling around a warm mug of tea. She was still wearing her flannel pajama pants and one of Ethan's old t-shirts, the fabric soft with wear. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun. She didn't care. Something about the night before had shifted her. She had kissed Ethan. Or rather, they had kissed each other. And it hadn't been a mistake. It had been honest and raw and terrifying. She told herself not to overthink it, but that was impossible. The moment replayed in her mind in fragments. The press of his mouth, the tremble in his hands, the way they'd stared at each other afterward, like they were seeing one another for the first time, and somehow recognizing something long missing. And now? She didn't know what now meant. Ethan entered the kitchen not long after, hair damp from a shower, wearing a navy sweater that brought out the blue in his eyes. He paused when he saw her, and for a moment, silence wrapped around them again. "Good morning," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Morning." They both moved simultaneously, he toward the coffee pot, she toward the fridge, nearly colliding. "Sorry," Dani muttered. "No, it's my fault," Ethan said, stepping back. They both laughed, a nervous, breathless sound. It shouldn't have felt so awkward, but it did. Not because they regretted what happened, but because they didn't. Ethan poured coffee, stealing glances at her over the rim of his mug. "Micah's still asleep?" "Out like a light. You're magic." Dani smiled faintly. "You kissed me last night." It wasn't an accusation or a declaration, just a fact. Ethan lowered his cup slowly. "Yeah, I did." She didn't say anything for a beat. Then, "Do you regret it?" "No." He moved closer, placing the mug on the counter behind her. "Do you?" Her eyes met his. "No." "But?" he asked gently. She drew a deep breath. "But this is messy. You're still grieving. Micah needs consistency. And You're scared," he finished for her. She nodded. "So am I." The front doorbell rang before either could say more. They both stilled. Mrs. Rivera passed through the hallway, heading for the foyer, her footsteps muffled. A few seconds later she returned, her expression uneasy. "There's someone here," she said softly from the Department of Children and Family Services. Dani's mug slipped from her hand and shattered on the tile. A woman in a navy blazer stood in the living room, clipboard in hand, accompanied by a uniformed officer. She had the expression of someone who had seen every excuse and heard every justification. Her hair was pulled tight at the nape of her neck, and she wore no visible makeup. "Mr. Caldwell?" she asked without preamble. Ethan stepped forward. "That's me. I'm Jennifer Walsh. We received a report regarding the welfare of your nephew, Micah Caldwell. We're here to conduct an emergency wellness check." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who filed the complaint?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose that," she replied coolly. Dani stood near the base of the stairs, her arms wrapped protectively around herself. Walsh's eyes flicked to her. "And you are?" "Danielle Walker. I'm Micah's caregiver." "Credentials?" "I'm a licensed pediatric nurse," Dani said evenly. "I've been living here temporarily to help with the baby's care." Walsh made a note on her clipboard. "How long have you been employed here?" "About 3 weeks. Are you related to the child?" "No." "Do you have formal nanny certification?" "No," Dani admitted, hating how small the word sounded. "More notes." Ethan stepped forward. "Micah has made incredible progress under her care. He was inconsolable before she arrived. Now he sleeps through the night. He's smiling, eating, connecting." "We'll need to see the nursery," Walsh said. Dani led her up the stairs, her hands clammy. Micah had woken by now, blinking up from his crib with a sleepy smile. "Sweet boy," Dani whispered, scooping him up. She held him close, kissing his head as the social worker observed silently. "This is a beautiful room," Walsh commented. "Well-stocked, clean. Micah's health and development are our top priorities," Dani said. "Everything I've done is for his well-being. Yet you're not legally related to him, not certified, and living here without formal employment documentation." Ethan appeared in the doorway. "We can provide documentation. We've spoken with a lawyer. The guardianship is legitimate." Walsh nodded, writing again. "I'll be filing a report. There are no visible signs of neglect or abuse, but the non-traditional nature of this arrangement is concerning. We'll be conducting follow-up visits. And in the meantime," Ethan asked, "you may keep custody for now. However, I suggest exploring more conventional care arrangements to avoid further scrutiny." She turned and left without another word. Dani sat heavily on the edge of the nursery rocker, Micah cradled in her arms, her entire body trembling. "This is her," Ethan said softly. "Genevieve. This has her fingerprints all over it." Dani didn't argue. She didn't have to, because deep down, she knew he was right. Later that night, the house felt suffocating. Micah was asleep again, unaware of the storm his tiny life had just weathered. Ethan sat on the couch, staring blankly at the fireplace, while Dani stood at the far end of the room, arms crossed tightly. "I put you in danger," Ethan said finally. "You and Micah." "No, you didn't. I should have anticipated this. I should have known she'd pull something like this. She filed a report. She didn't win. She will if we don't act fast," he said bitterly. "She'll keep coming, and she has resources we don't. So we fight." He looked at her. "At what cost?" Dani took a shaky breath. "What are you saying? That maybe you shouldn't stay?" The words hit her like a slap. "I'm trying to protect you," he added quickly. "You'll be dragged into it if this turns into a custody battle. You'll lose everything." "I already lost everything," she snapped, eyes flashing. "My daughter, my home, my career. I'm not afraid of losing again." "I am," he shouted, then ran a hand through his hair. "I'm terrified of losing you, or losing him." Dani's voice dropped. "Then don't ask me to walk away." They stood in silence, hearts pounding. "I love him," she whispered. "I know. I care about you." Ethan stepped forward. "And I care about you. But love isn't always enough, not when the world keeps trying to tear it down." She nodded slowly, her eyes stinging. "Then we make it enough," she said. "Together." Ethan stared at her, and for the first time since the report, hope flickered again. "We'll figure it out," he said. "One moment at a time," she replied, just like the night of the storm. But even as they stood together in the living room, the shadows around them were long and uncertain, and Dani knew this was only the beginning. Because when love is tested by power, jealousy, and law, it has to be more than enough. It has to be everything. The days that followed the welfare check felt like walking through a minefield. Every step brought a fresh uncertainty. Every glance held a question mark. Dani and Ethan navigated the new tension with quiet determination, their shared focus unwavering, despite the gnawing anxiety lurking beneath the surface. The house was no longer just a home. It had become a battleground. But still, they fought. It was a chilly Thursday evening when Ethan found Dani in the nursery, seated on the window seat with Micah cradled in her arms. The baby giggled softly at seeing a stuffed bear dangling above his crib, and Dani's face was contented. Ethan's chest tightened. He sat beside her without a word, watching how she rocked Micah, the tenderness in her eyes. "We have to do something," he said quietly after a long moment. Dani looked up. "I know. This isn't sustainable. he continued. Genevieve, is relentless. Social services have been polite, but it's clear who's pulling the strings. Dani's jaw tightened. We have to be smarter. Document everything, get more professional support, and show the judge Micah's thriving here. Ethan nodded, a shadow crossing his face. I have a lawyer working on it, but I want to talk about something else. Dani's eyes narrowed slightly. What? He took a deep breath. Marriage. She blinked, surprised. Not as a quick fix, he said, shaking his head. Not because of the investigation. Because I want you in my life. Fully. Dani's heart skipped. Marry me, he said, looking at her with an honesty that made her breath catch. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because you and Micah are my family. She stared at him, the weight of those words sinking in. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. It was everything she hadn't dared hope for. I'm not sure what to say, she whispered. Say yes. A laugh bubbled up, soft and unexpected. Are you sure this isn't another business deal? Only one where I'm the most vulnerable partner. Dani reached out and took his hand. I'm scared. Me too. They sat together, hands intertwined, the baby cooing between them like the world was right for a moment. That weekend, they made the announcement, quietly, to close friends and family first, then more broadly. The news rippled through their lives like a wave breaking. Some reactions were warm, others were cold and wary. Genevieve's fury was predictable but no less painful. You're making a mistake, she sneered when she learned. You'll regret this. Ethan only smiled. No, I won't. Planning the wedding was a whirlwind. It wasn't a grand affair. No cathedral bells or ornate gowns. A small garden ceremony bathed in golden autumn light, where the leaves whispered promises overhead. Dani wore a simple ivory dress, flowing and soft, with her hair loose in gentle waves. Ethan was in a navy suit, the same color as his eyes, looking impossibly proud and vulnerable. Micah was their ring-bearer, toddling in a tiny tuxedo, almost too big, dropping the rings twice before Mrs. Rivera caught them with a grin. The day was perfect in its imperfection. Friends and family gathered in the garden, the air filled with laughter and tears. As Dani and Ethan exchanged vows, the world outside seemed to fade away. They promised to face the future, uncertain and messy, as one, to protect their family, to love unconditionally, to choose each other every day. Later that evening, as dusk settled, Dani found herself alone with Ethan on the terrace. The city lights sparkled below, and the cool breeze whispered around them. Ethan pulled her close, fingers tracing the curve of her waist. I'm scared, he admitted, but I'm not letting go. She smiled against his chest. Neither am I. He kissed the top of her head. We're stronger than this world thinks. We have to be. Micah's laughter drifted inside the house, a sound of hope and promise. At that moment, Dani knew their story was far from over. But no matter what storms came next, they would face them together. Because sometimes, love isn't just enough. Sometimes, it's everything. The morning after the wedding dawned crisp and clear, but the brightness outside did little to chase the shadows that had quietly gathered inside the Caldwell home. Dani stirred awake, the faint sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, casting pale patterns on the ceiling. Her fingers brushed instinctively against her bare stomach, where a tiny life was already growing. A secret she had only recently dared to admit to herself, let alone to Ethan. The joy of the previous day still echoed faintly in her chest, but it was tempered by the gnawing weight of what lay ahead. Because while love had bound them together, the world beyond their walls was far less forgiving. Breakfast was subdued. Ethan sat across from her at the kitchen island, fingers absently tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Micah was nestled beside Dani, happily gnawing on a banana slice, blissfully unaware of the tension thickening the air. "I got a call," Ethan said finally, voice low. Dani looked up, sensing the shift immediately. "From Genevieve," he continued. "She's not done. She's hired a private investigator." Dani's breath caught. "Why would she do that?" she asked, forcing calm. "To dig up anything she can use against us. To undermine the guardianship. To scare you." Dani's jaw tightened. "We have to be ready." Ethan nodded. Lawyers prepping a defense strategy. But the closer this gets, the more it feels like a war. She reached across the table, taking his hand. "We're in this together. Always." The following days were a blur of meetings, calls, and careful documentation. Dani became a master of paperwork, collecting medical records, nanny references, and evidence of Micah's thriving health. Yet even as they built their case, the undercurrent of fear remained. Every unexpected knock at the door, every unfamiliar face at the gate sent a jolt through her nerves. She no longer recognized the peaceful sanctuary she had once called home. One evening, as dusk settled and the house was bathed in twilight, Dani sat in the nursery reviewing a file of Micah's recent developmental reports. The soft glow of a lamp illuminated the pages, but the sudden chime of her phone shattered her focus. It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Ms. Walker?" The voice was cold, clinical. "This is Patricia Henley from Lincoln Academy. We have an opening for a live-in nanny position. The salary and benefits are generous. We understand you may be interested." Dani's heart hammered. "I'm happy where I am," she said cautiously. "I understand. However, with the current situation, this offer could provide stability and a clear career path. The family is ready for an immediate start should you be available." The call ended before Dani could respond further. She sat back, stunned. A way out, or a trap. That night, Dani confided in Ethan. He listened carefully, then frowned. "Genevieve's playing a long game," he said grimly, "trying to isolate you, to make you feel like you have no choice but to leave." Dani shook her head. "I'm not going anywhere." Ethan's voice softened. "I'm scared for you, for us. This isn't just about a baby anymore. It's about control." She reached for his hand. "We fight smarter. We fight stronger. And if it tears us apart, we don't let it." The tension broke down days later when the private investigator showed up unannounced. Mrs. Rivera's sharp eyes caught him lurking near the gate, and Dani's heart dropped when she saw the subtle camera tucked under his coat. Ethan confronted the man with a fierce glare. "This property is private," Ethan said coldly. "Leave." The man smirked, undeterred. Dani felt a surge of protective fury. "This ends now," she whispered. Amid the turmoil, there were moments of quiet bravery. Micah's first steps wobbled into the nursery, and Dani and Ethan caught each other's eyes, breathless with pride and hope. Late-night talks about dreams, fears, and futures unfolded in whispered confessions. Their love deepened, even as the world threatened to unravel them. But shadows remained. Late one night, Ethan sat alone in his study, scrolling through emails, when a file caught his eye. A cryptic and urgent message from a close business associate. It hinted at old mistakes, buried secrets, and leverage Genevieve might wield if she uncovered them. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. Dani entered quietly, sensing his storm. "What is it?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Something from my past I thought was long gone. But it's coming back." She took his hand. We face it together. He nodded, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The fight for their family was no longer just legal or social. It was personal, a test of strength, trust, and the unyielding power of love. And as Dani and Ethan stood together against the gathering storm, they knew the road ahead would be the hardest yet, but they would walk it side by side. Because when secrets stir and shadows loom, only the bravest hearts survive, and they were ready to fight. The dawn broke cold and gray, casting a muted light across the Caldwell estate. Despite the soft glow of morning, the house was heavy with tension, like the calm before a storm that promised to shatter everything. Dani awoke to the shrill ring of her phone. It was early. Too early. But the message was urgent. Court date set for next Tuesday. Prepare for hearings. We'll need every document, witness, and piece of evidence ready. This isn't going away. Her heart sank. The fight had officially begun. Downstairs, Ethan was already reviewing legal briefs and communications. His usual corporate composure was undercut by tight lines around his mouth and tired eyes. The weight of the looming battle pressed on him like a physical force. When Dani entered the study, clutching her stack of paperwork, their eyes met, and no words were necessary. They were partners in this war. We need to solidify the narrative, Ethan said. Micah's well-being and the stability we've created here, every detail has to be airtight. Dani nodded. I've gathered statements from Dr. Peterson, Mrs. Rivera, and even the neighbors, people who've seen the transformation firsthand. Ethan looked at her, pride mingled with exhaustion. You've been incredible. She gave a small, tired smile. We're doing this for Micah, for us. Over the following days, the house transformed into a strategic command center. Legal documents were scattered across the dining table, photos of Micah's milestones pinned to corkboards, and medical reports meticulously organized in binders. Dani and Ethan worked tirelessly, rehearsing testimonies, cross-examining possible scenarios, and preparing for the inevitable attacks. Genevieve, undeterred, escalated her efforts, sending more investigators, making veiled threats through lawyers, and attempting to manipulate social services officials. Her attacks were relentless. One afternoon, when the doorbell rang unexpectedly, Dani sat with Mrs. Rivera, reviewing baby care routines and developmental progress. A tall man in a tailored suit stood at the door, an attorney from Genevieve's legal team. I'm here to discuss settlement options, he said smoothly. Dani's jaw clenched. There's nothing to settle. Micah's thriving here. The man smiled thinly. That's for the court to decide. He handed her a business card and left. Dani closed the door firmly, turning to find Ethan in the hall, concern across his face. They're trying to intimidate us, he said quietly. We're not backing down. The weekend brought brief respite, a chance to breathe and remember why they fought. They spent the day outside, watching Micah chase after falling leaves, his laughter ringing clear and free. In those moments, Dani allowed herself to hope, but the battle was far from over. Monday arrived with a pounding at the front door. This time, the Department of Children and Family Services had returned with multiple officers and a court order demanding an inspection. Dani and Ethan stood firm as the officials swept through the house, scrutinizing every room and every corner. The social worker's eyes softened as she observed Micah playing, happy and healthy. I see no signs of neglect, she said quietly. However, the unconventional nature of this arrangement will require ongoing review. Ethan's jaw tightened. We'll cooperate fully. Dani felt Ethan's hand brush hers, a silent promise amidst the storm. The courtroom battle was merciless. Genevieve's attorneys painted a picture of instability, casting doubt on Dani's qualifications and Ethan's ability to parent alone. But Dani and Ethan fought back with fierce determination. Their lawyer presented glowing testimonials, detailed medical records, and video evidence of Micah's progress. Dani testified with quiet strength, recounting every sleepless night, every milestone, every moment of love and care. Ethan spoke of his grief, his growth, and his unwavering commitment. The judge listened intently, weighing the facts, the emotions, and the undeniable truth. In a moment that felt suspended in time, the ruling came. Custody was upheld. Dani's role as Micah's caregiver was affirmed, and the family they had built was protected. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan turned to Dani, his eyes shining with relief and gratitude. "We did it." She smiled, tears threatening to spill. "We did." They embraced, the weight of the fight lifting, if only for a moment. That night, the house was alive and having a quiet celebration. Micah slept soundly, oblivious to the battles fought on his behalf. Ethan and Dani sat together on the terrace, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. "We're stronger than they thought," Ethan whispered. "Stronger than we ever imagined." They kissed softly, the promise of tomorrow burning bright between them. Because the battle lines had been drawn together, they had emerged victorious. But the war for their family's future was far from over, and they would face it, united. The early morning sun spilled softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Caldwell home, casting warm, golden light across the familiar rooms. It was a new day that held both the promise of beginnings and the quiet triumph of battles won. Dani awoke first, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. The baby within her stirred gently, a tiny reminder of the fragile yet powerful life they had created together, born from love, resilience, and unwavering hope. She smiled softly, thinking of Ethan in the next room, already awake and creeping to prepare breakfast. The house was alive with the gentle hum of family, the laughter of Micah echoing from the nursery, the soft rustle of papers as Ethan read the morning news, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Life had changed. They had changed. But some things remained sacred. Downstairs, Ethan carried a tray to the kitchen table, pancakes just slightly uneven, fresh fruit, and steaming mugs of coffee and tea. Micah bounded in behind him, cheeks flushed with the morning's excitement. "Good morning, Mama," the toddler announced with a grin, his small hands outstretched. Dani laughed, rising to embrace him. "Good morning, sweetheart." They settled around the table, the simple meal filled with the rich comfort of family. Ethan reached for Dani's hand, squeezing it gently. "I can't believe how far we've come," he murmured. She nodded. "Neither can I. From chaos to this. Home." He smiled, eyes shining from strangers to family. Their gaze lingered on Micah, who babbled happily as he tried to balance a strawberry on his nose. "Look at him," Dani whispered, "so full of life." Ethan's hand moved to rest over hers again. "We made this. Together." The weeks that followed were a tapestry of ordinary miracles. Late-night talks about dreams and fears, planning for the future, and embracing the unexpected twists life threw their way. Dani's pregnancy blossomed, her energy growing with each passing day. Ethan became her steadfast partner, supportive, patient, and endlessly loving. Micah continued to thrive, taking his first steps, speaking his first words, and filling their home with the beautiful chaos of childhood. One afternoon, as autumn leaves drifted lazily outside, Dani and Ethan sat on the terrace, wrapped in blankets and sipping tea. The air was crisp, the sky a brilliant canvas of oranges and purples. "We never planned for this," Dani said softly. Ethan took her hand, fingers intertwining. "Sometimes the best things in life come unplanned." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. We chose each other, and that choice changed everything. They sat silently, the warmth between them a steady beacon against the chill. Their wedding, now months behind them, felt like a distant but beautiful memory, a promise made under golden leaves, witnessed by those who loved them. But the real journey, the one they walked every day, was in the little moments, in the laughter shared over spilled juice, in the quiet reassurance of a hand held tight during nights, in the courage to face the future, no matter what it held. Even the shadows that had once threatened to tear them apart now seemed smaller, diminished by the strength of their bond. Genevieve's presence faded into the past, her attempts to fracture their family thwarted by truth, love, and unwavering resolve. Dani smiled as she watched Ethan and Micah play in the garden, throwing a ball, their faces bright with joy. She closed her eyes, breathing in the moment. This was more than she had ever dared hope for, more than she had ever imagined possible. Later, as the house settled into a quiet night, Ethan found Dani alone on the terrace, gazing at the stars. He slipped beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" "For the future we choose." She smiled, eyes glistening. "I've never been more ready." He leaned down, kissing her softly, the promise of forever between them. Together, they looked up at the vast sky, their hearts filled with hope, because love had brought them here. Love had healed their wounds, and love would guide them through every tomorrow. Their story was not one of perfection, but of courage, of choosing hope when darkness threatened, of building a family not defined by blood, but by the unbreakable bonds they forged. And as the night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, Dani, Ethan, and Micah faced the future as one, ready to write the next chapter of their extraordinary journey. Because the future was theirs to choose, and they would choose it together.